30 years I spent building a construction empire, so my kids could have everything I never had. College tuition, wedding expenses, house down payments. I gave them the world. Then my wife died, and suddenly I discovered what my 3 successful children really thought of their old man. Absolutely nothing. For 2 years I might as well have been invisible. No calls, no visits, no acknowledgement that I was drowning in grief and loneliness. I'm Vincent Castellano, 73 years old, and I learned the hard way that raising ungrateful children is like pouring water into a bucket with no bottom. No matter how much you give, it's never enough to fill the emptiness where their hearts should. But here's what really gets me. The moment they heard I was seeing someone new, suddenly I had their full attention. Not because they cared about my happiness, because they cared about their inheritance. Anyone who's ever sacrificed their dreams for ungrateful kids knows exactly what I'm talking about. Let me paint you the picture of how I raised the 3 most selfish people you've ever met. Because this story starts 30 years ago, when I was stupid enough to think that love and money were the same thing. Back in 1994, I was running Castellano Construction with 12 employees and big dreams. Rosa, my wife of 25 years, was the bookkeeper, office manager, and heart of the operation. We weren't rich, but we were building something solid. Marcus was 15, Antonio was 12, and little Dominic was just 9 years old. Every morning at 5 a.m. I'd kiss Rosa goodbye and head out to construction sites where I'd spend 12 hours in the sun, rain, or snow, building other people's dreams so I could fund my children's futures. Every penny of profit went into college funds, music lessons, sports equipment, and whatever else the boys wanted. Marcus wanted to be a lawyer. I worked double shifts to pay for debate camp and SAT prep courses. Antonio dreamed of medical school. I took on weekend projects to fund his science fair projects and pre-med programs. Dominic showed artistic talent. I sacrificed family vacations to pay for art supplies and private lessons. For 18 years, I poured everything into those boys. Rosa and I drove used cars while they drove new ones to high school. We wore the same clothes for years while they had designer everything. We ate leftovers while they ate restaurant meals with friends, and they took every single sacrifice for granted. Marcus graduated law school and immediately moved to Manhattan, too important for his blue-collar father. Antonio became a cardiologist and settled in California, claiming he was too busy saving lives to visit his parents more than twice a year. Dominic became a successful graphic designer in Chicago, apparently too creative and sophisticated to waste time in his hometown with ordinary people like his parents. The pattern was set early. They'd call when they needed money, visit when social. Pressure demanded it, and disappear completely when life got messy. When Rosa started showing symptoms of pancreatic cancer in 2019, I called all 3 boys immediately. "Your mother is sick," I told them. "Really sick. The doctors are running tests, but it looks serious." Marcus: "That's terrible, Dad. Keep me posted. I'm in the middle of a huge case right now, but I'll try to get home soon." Antonio: "Oh no. Well, you know I have connections in oncology. Let me make some calls and see what I can do from here." Dominic: "Shit, Dad. That sucks. I'm tied up with this massive client project, but I'll definitely come visit when things calm down. Soon. From here. When things calm down." My wife was dying, and my 3 sons were already making excuses for why they couldn't be bothered to show up. Rosa fought for 8 months. 8 months of chemo, radiation, pain, fear, and gradual decline. 8 months when I needed my children more than I'd ever needed anyone in my life. Marcus visited twice, both times for less than 24 hours, both times spending most of his visit on work calls. Antonio came 3 times, each visit lasting about 4 hours before he had to get back to his patients. Dominic managed 1 visit, arrived hungover, and spent the afternoon complaining about airline delays and hotel prices. Not one of them was there when Rosa took her last breath. I called them all that terrible Tuesday morning in March 2020. "Your mother died at 6:47 this morning," I said. "She asked for you boys with her last words." The silence on those phone calls told me everything I needed to know about who I'd raised. Marcus: "Jesus, Dad, I'm so sorry. Look, I'll handle the funeral arrangements from here. Just tell me what you need." What I needed was my son to hold his grieving father, not to manage my wife's death like a business transaction from 300 miles away. Antonio. Dad, I'm devastated. Mom was such a fighter. I'll fly in tonight for the funeral. He stayed exactly 36 hours, left immediately after the reception, and that was the last time I saw my middle son for over a year. Dominic. Fuck, Dad. This is so fucked up. I can't believe she's gone. That was the extent of his emotional support. Profanity and disbelief, followed by radio silence for the next 8 months. Those of you who've buried a spouse while your children treat it like an inconvenience know exactly how alone I felt during those first months of widowhood. For 2 years, after Rosa's funeral, I lived like a ghost in my own life. The construction business kept me busy during the day, but evenings and weekends stretched endlessly in our empty house. I'd sit in Rosa's chair, eating frozen dinners and watching television shows she used to love, waiting for phone calls that never came. Marcus would call every 6 weeks with the same robotic check-in. How's business, Dad? Everything good? Great. Listen, I'm slammed right now, but we should catch up soon. Soon never happened. Antonio sent text messages. Hope you're well, Dad. Things are crazy here with the practice, but thinking of you, thinking of me wasn't the same as actually visiting me, but apparently that distinction was too subtle for a cardiologist to understand. Dominic simply vanished. For 14 months, my youngest son managed to have zero contact with his widowed father. Guy could have had a heart attack, a stroke, or a mental breakdown, and Dominic wouldn't have known until someone called him about my estate. This is what I discovered about raising children who see you as an ATM instead of a human being. The moment. You stop providing immediate financial benefit. You cease to exist in their minds. But everything changed when I met Elena Rodriguez at the community center's grief support group. Elena had lost her husband Carlos 2 years earlier, and like me, she'd learned that adult children who promise to always be there for you often disappear the moment their presence requires actual effort instead of just good intentions. The first time Elena and I grabbed coffee after group therapy, we talked for 3 hours about everything except our disappointing children. Art, travel, books, politics, memories of better times when we felt valued by the people we'd sacrificed everything to raise. Elena was brilliant, funny, and genuinely interested in what I had to say. When I talked about construction projects, she asked detailed questions and remembered the answers. When I mentioned Rosa, she listened without trying to change the subject or offer empty platitudes. Most importantly, Elena seemed genuinely happy to spend time with me. Not obligated, not uncomfortable, not checking her watch, actually happy. For the first time in 2 years, I felt like a person worth knowing, instead of a burden people tolerated out of social obligation. Within 6 months, Elena and I were spending every day together. She'd come to job sites and bring lunch. I'd help her with home repairs and garden projects. We traveled to places Rosa and I had always planned to visit someday. We hosted dinner parties for other couples our age who actually enjoyed each other's company. Elena made me remember what it felt like to be loved instead of just needed. Naturally, my children despised her. The trouble started when Marcus called out of nowhere, his first voluntary phone call in 5 months. Dad, I heard through the grapevine that you've been seeing someone. The grapevine. Marcus had heard gossip about his father's personal life from strangers before he'd heard it directly from me, because he never bothered to actually ask about my life during our brief obligatory phone conversations. Her name is Elena, and yes, we've been spending time together. She's wonderful. Dad, don't you think you're rushing into something? Mum's only been gone 2 years. 2 years. Marcus thought 2 years of complete isolation was too short a grieving period, despite the fact that he'd contributed exactly nothing to my emotional support during that time. Marcus, your mother would have wanted me to find companionship. She, always worried about me being alone. But Dad, you need to be careful. Women your age, especially ones without much money, sometimes they're looking for financial security more than genuine companionship. Financial security. My son's first concern wasn't whether Elena made me happy or treated me well. His first concern was protecting his future inheritance from a woman he'd never met. That conversation told me everything I needed to know about Marcus's priorities, but it was just the beginning of my children's coordinated campaign to destroy the first happiness I'd found since Rosa's death. Next came Antonio, suddenly calling after months of text message communication. "Dad, Marcus told me you're dating someone. I just want to make sure you're being smart about this." "What does being smart mean, Antonio?" "Well, you're vulnerable right now, and there are women who specifically target widowed men with assets. I see it all the time in my practice. Older men who get taken advantage of by women who are really just gold diggers. Gold diggers." Antonio, who'd spent his entire adult life accepting money from his father without question, was lecturing me about women who might be interested in my assets. "Antonio, Elena has her own money. Her husband left her very comfortable financially." "That's what she tells you, Dad. But have you verified that? Have you done any background checks or financial investigations?" "Background checks? My son wanted me to hire private investigators to spy on the woman who'd brought joy back into my life because God forbid anyone might interfere with his inheritance expectations." Finally, Dominic emerged from his 18 months of silence with a phone call that was pure poison. "Dad, what the fuck are you thinking? Some random woman shows up at grief counseling and suddenly you're acting like a teenager. This is embarrassing. Dominic, I haven't heard from you in over a year, and your first words to me are criticism about my personal life? Because someone needs to talk sense into you before you do something stupid. Dad, you're 73 years old. You're not equipped to handle manipulative women who are looking for a sugar daddy." A sugar daddy? My youngest son, who hadn't contributed a single day of emotional support during my grief, was calling me a sugar daddy for finding companionship with a woman who'd shown me more kindness in 6 months than my children had shown me in 6 years. But the real shock came when all 3 boys showed up at my house for an intervention. The first time they'd all been in the same room together since Rosa's funeral. They sat in my living room like a tribunal, presenting their united front against Elena and my right to happiness. "Dad, we're concerned," Marcus began in his lawyer voice. "This relationship is moving too fast, and we think you're making decisions based on loneliness rather than logic." Every parent who's ever been lectured by ungrateful children about making logical decisions knows exactly how insulting this conversation felt. But what happened next changed everything between us forever and set in motion the chain of events that would teach my children the most expensive lesson of their entitled lives. The family intervention in my living room lasted 3 hours and revealed more about my children's character than 30 years of raising them ever had. Marcus had prepared a folder of printed articles about predatory relationships targeting wealthy widowers. Antonio brought medical studies about cognitive decline affecting judgment in elderly men. Dominic contributed conspiracy theories about women who research obituaries to find vulnerable targets. Not once during their prepared presentations did any of them ask if Elena made me happy, if she treated me well, or if I felt loved for the first time in years. Their entire focus was protecting assets they assumed would someday be theirs. The breaking point came when Marcus pulled out legal documents he'd prepared without my knowledge or consent. "Dad, we've taken the liberty of having some paperwork drawn up," he said, sliding papers across my coffee table. "It's a prenuptial agreement, template and some asset protection strategies we think you should consider before this relationship goes any further." Asset protection strategies. My children had hired lawyers and financial advisors to protect their inheritance from the woman who'd brought me back to life. Anyone who's ever been treated like a confused old man by kids who want to control your money knows exactly how insulting this felt. "Marcus, I never said Elena and I were getting married." "But Dad, relationships at your age tend to move quickly because of mortality concerns," Antonio chimed in with his medical authority voice. "Elena might be pressuring you toward marriage to secure legal access to your assets." Elena has never mentioned marriage, money, or my will in 6 months of dating. "Of course she hasn't," Dominic said with a smirk. "She's smarter than that. The good ones never seem desperate. They make you think it's all your idea." The good ones. My youngest son was calling Elena a con artist based on absolutely zero evidence, except his assumption that no woman could genuinely care about his father. That's when I made the decision that would change our family dynamics forever. "Get out," I said quietly. "Dad, we're just trying to help," Marcus protested. "Get out of my house, all three of you, now." "Dad, you're being emotional," Antonio said, in his condescending doctor voice. "Let's discuss this rationally." Rationally? I stood up and walked to the front door. "You want to discuss something rationally? Here's rational. I haven't heard from any of you in months unless you needed something. You missed your mother's death, ignored my grief, and abandoned me completely. Now the first time I'm happy in 2 years, you show up with lawyers and conspiracy theories." "We're trying to protect you from making a mistake," Marcus said. "The mistake was raising 3 children who think love is weakness and money is the only thing worth protecting." I opened the front door. "Leave. And don't come back unless you can treat Elena and me with basic human respect." They left, but not quietly. Marcus threatened to monitor the situation closely. Antonio warned me about making irreversible decisions while emotionally compromised. Dominic called me a stubborn old fool who was going to regret this. 3 weeks later, I did something that finally got my children's complete attention for the first time in decades. I changed my will. For 30 years, my estate plan had been simple. Everything divided equally among Marcus, Antonio, and Dominic. The construction business, the real estate investments, the life insurance policies, the retirement accounts, roughly $2.3 million. Split 3 ways after Elena had been treated like gold-digging scum by people who'd never bothered to get to know her. But Elena wasn't the problem. My children's entitled attitudes toward inheritance they'd never earned was the problem, so I fixed it. I called my attorney, Frank Pellegrino, who'd handled my business legal work for 20 years. Frank had watched my boys grow up, attended their graduations, and knew exactly how little effort they'd put into maintaining relationships with their parents. "Frank, I want to revise my will completely," I told him during our meeting. "Elena Rodriguez is going to become the primary beneficiary of my estate." Frank raised his eyebrows but didn't argue. He'd been there during Rosa's illness and had watched my children's pathetic performance as loving sons. "What about Marcus, Antonio, and Dominic? They'll each receive $10,000, enough to cover funeral expenses if they decide to attend." "Mine. Vincent, that's a significant change. Are you sure about this?" "Frank, in 2 years of widowerhood, my children have treated me like an inconvenience. Elena has treated me like someone worth loving. I'm leaving my money to the person who actually cares whether I live or die." The new will was signed, notarized, and filed within a week. Elena knew nothing about it. I wanted her love to remain, completely separate from any financial considerations. But I'll admit, I was curious to see how long it would take my children to find out about the change. The answer was 6 weeks. Marcus called first, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Dad, I just spoke with Frank Pellegrino about some business questions, and he mentioned you'd updated your estate planning recently." Frank, bless him, had been strategically indiscreet. He'd probably enjoyed watching Marcus fish for information about his reduced inheritance. "Yes, I made some changes." "What kind of changes?" "The kind that reflect my current family situation and priorities." "Dad, we should discuss this. Estate planning is complicated, and decisions made during emotionally charged periods sometimes don't reflect long-term thinking." Long-term thinking. Marcus was lecturing me about long-term thinking when he'd spent 2 years demonstrating his complete lack of interest in having any relationship with me long-term or otherwise. "Marcus, my thinking is perfectly clear. I'm leaving my money to people who actually want me in their lives." The silence stretched until Marcus finally asked, "People? Plural?" "Elena and several charities that do important work with neglected elderly people." I heard him suck in breath. "Dad, this is exactly what we were worried about. Elena has manipulated you into changing your will in her favor." "Elena doesn't know about the will change, and she's never asked about my finances." "The manipulation came from you, Antonio, and Dominic when you ambushed me with lawyers and asset protection schemes. We were trying to protect you. You were trying to protect your inheritance. There's a difference." I hung up and waited for the next call. It came 20 minutes later from Antonio. "Dad, Marcus told me about the will situation. I think we need to have a family meeting to work this out." "There's nothing to work out, Antonio. I'm leaving my money to Elena because she's the only person in my life who acts like she loves me, instead of just tolerating me. Dad, that's not fair. We love you. We've just been busy with our careers and families, too busy for 2 years to visit your grieving father, but not too busy to call when your inheritance is threatened. Parents dealing with selfish adult children understand exactly how transparent this sudden concern felt. Antonio, when was the last time you visited me? Well, it's been a while, but you know how crazy things get with the practice. 14 months, Antonio. 14 months since you've been in the same room as your father. Dad, that doesn't mean I don't love you. What does it mean then? He couldn't answer that question because we both knew what it meant. I was a low priority in his life until money got involved. Dominic's call came an hour later, and it was pure rage. Dad, what the fuck is wrong with you? You're giving our inheritance to some woman you've known for 6 months. Dominic, when was the last time you called me? What does that have to do with anything? Everything. It has everything to do with everything. You disappeared for over a year after your mother died. Radio silence while I was drowning in grief. But now that your inheritance is threatened, suddenly you're concerned about our relationship. That's different, Dad. I was dealing with my own stuff. Your own stuff was more important than your widowed father for 14 months, but my will is important enough for an immediate phone call. The beautiful thing about cutting ungrateful children out of your will is how quickly it reveals their true priorities. Suddenly, the son who couldn't find time to visit his grieving father had plenty of time to argue about money. But their real desperation became clear when all 3 boys showed up at my house the next weekend, together, unannounced, with their wives in tow for moral support. Dad, we need to talk about this will situation, Marcus announced as they invaded my living room like a hostile takeover committee. There's nothing to talk about, Marcus. My money, my decision. But it's not just your decision, Antonio jumped. And this affects our children too. Your grandchildren who you claim to love. Your grandchildren. Antonio was using kids I barely got to see as emotional leverage to restore his inheritance. The same grandchildren who were apparently too busy with activities to visit Grandpa, but not too busy to inherit Grandpa's money. My grandchildren will be fine with parents who are doctors and lawyers, I replied. They don't need my money as much as Elena does. That's when Dominic's wife Rachel spoke up, a woman who'd never said more than 10 words to me in 5 years of family gatherings. Mr. Castellano, don't you think it's unfair to punish your sons for Elena's manipulation? She's obviously using grief counseling to target vulnerable widowers. Elena was using grief counseling to recover from her own husband's death, but facts weren't important when inheritance money was at stake. Rachel, have you ever met Elena? Well, no, but then shut up about things you know nothing about. The room went silent. Apparently nobody had expected the grief-stricken widower to have any fight left in him. Marcus tried to regain control. Dad, we've researched Elena's background. Did you know she was married 3 times before Carlos? So, what? Doesn't that seem like a pattern to you? Multiple marriages to older men with money. Marcus, I've been married once to your mother for 43 years. By your logic, that makes me a worse person than Elena. That's not the same thing, and you know it. What I know is that Elena makes me happy and you 3 make me miserable. So I'm leaving my money to the person who brings joy to my life instead of the people who treat me like an obligation. But the nuclear moment came when Antonio pulled out his phone and showed me photographs. Dad, we hired a private investigator to look into Elena's background. These are pictures of her with other elderly men from her grief support groups over the past 5 years. Private investigators. My children had hired professionals to spy on the woman who'd brought love back into my life, looking for evidence to support their gold-digger narrative. Anyone who's ever had their children hire detectives to investigate their romantic relationships knows exactly how violated and enraged this made me feel. Get out, I said, my voice deadly quiet. All of you, get out of my house and don't come back. Dad, we're trying to save you from making a terrible mistake, Marcus pleaded. The terrible mistake was raising children who think hiring private investigators to spy on their father's girlfriend is acceptable behavior. We're protecting you. You're protecting your money, my money, money you've never earned and don't deserve. That's when I dropped the bomb that ended our relationship permanently. Actually, boys, there's something else you should know about my revised will. They all leaned forward with the desperate attention they'd never shown my emotional needs. I've also arranged for Elena to inherit the construction company. She'll be running Castellano Construction after I'm gone. The horror on their faces was absolutely priceless. Not only were they losing their inheritance, but the family business would be controlled by the woman they'd tried to destroy. "Dad, you can't be serious," Dominic whispered. "Dead serious. Elena has more business sense in her little finger than the three of you have combined. She'll do a better job running the company than any of you would." That was the moment my children realized their greed and arrogance had cost them everything. But their reaction to losing their inheritance would reveal the absolute worst of their character and lead to a confrontation that would make everything that came before look like a polite disagreement. What happened after I told my children they'd lost both their inheritance and control of the family business can only be described as a complete meltdown of three adults who'd never been told no in their entire lives. Marcus started pacing. My living room like a caged animal, Antonio began hyperventilating, and Dominic actually threw my coffee table magazine at the wall. Their wives sat in stunned silence, probably calculating how this would affect their own financial futures. "Dad, you can't do this," Marcus said, his lawyer training finally kicking in. "There are legal ways to challenge a will, especially when someone's been manipulated into making irrational changes. Go ahead and challenge it, Marcus. Spend your own money on lawyers to prove that your father is mentally incompetent. That should really improve our relationship. We have documentation of your isolation, depression, and vulnerability to manipulation," Antonio added, pulling out his phone. "I've been keeping notes about your mental state since Mom died." Medical documentation. My son, the cardiologist, had been building a case to declare me mentally unfit, probably planning to use it for guardianship proceedings if I became inconvenient to manage. Those of you who've discovered your own children were secretly documenting your mental decline to steal your independence. Know exactly how betrayed this made me feel. Antonio, those notes will make interesting evidence of your neglect, not my incompetence. 2 years of a son documenting his father's depression while providing zero emotional support? Good luck explaining that to a judge. But Dominic had moved, past legal strategies straight to emotional blackmail. "Dad, what about Emma and Jake?" he said, referring to Marcus's teenage children. "And Sophia, Antonio's 10-year-old daughter? You're stealing their college funds, their future security. How is that fair?" Now my grandchildren were weapons in the inheritance war. Kids I saw maybe 3 times a year were suddenly central to my moral obligations, according to the son who'd ignored me for 14 months straight. "Dominic, your brothers make more money than most people see in a lifetime. Emma, Jake, and Sophia will be fine. But you know who won't be fine? Elena, if something happens to me and she has no financial security." "She's not your responsibility," Rachel screamed, losing all pretense of politeness. "Your family is your responsibility. Blood is thicker than water. Blood is thicker than water." The rallying cry of relatives who provide nothing but DNA and expect everything in return. "Rachel, Elena has shown me more love in 8 months than my blood family has shown me in 8 years. So no, blood isn't thicker than water. Kindness is thicker than blood." That's when Marcus played what he thought was his trump card. "Dad, we've been talking to Elena's stepdaughter from her second marriage. She confirmed that Elena has a pattern of targeting widowers with assets. She isolated her stepfather from his family, convinced him to change his will and inherited everything when he died." Elena had never mentioned a second marriage or a stepdaughter, which gave me a moment of doubt. But then I remembered something crucial about my children's character. They were desperate liars when money was involved. "Marcus, show me this stepdaughter. Let me talk to her directly." "She doesn't want to get involved directly, but she provided written statements about Elena's behavior patterns. Written statements from anonymous sources. Even desperate, my son was still enough of a lawyer to know that hearsay and fabricated evidence wouldn't hold up under scrutiny. Either produce this stepdaughter for a face-to-face conversation or admit you're making things up to manipulate me." The uncomfortable silence that followed told me everything I needed to know about their evidence, but Antonio tried a different approach: medical coercion. "Dad, I'm concerned about your heart. This level of stress and conflict isn't healthy for someone your age. Maybe we should have you evaluated by a cardiologist who specializes in elderly patient care. A cardiac evaluation to declare me medically unfit to make financial decisions. My son was literally threatening to abuse his medical credentials to steal my independence. Antonio, the only thing stressing my heart is having children who see me as an obstacle to their inheritance instead of a father who deserves basic respect. We do respect you, Dad, Marcus said. But respect goes both ways. You're not respecting our concerns about Elena or our rights as your children. Rights as my children. Marcus thought being born entitled him to my money, regardless of how he'd treated me as an adult. What rights, Marcus? The right to ignore me for months at a time? The right to miss your mother's death? The right to treat me like an ATM when you need money and an embarrassment when you don't? That's not fair, Dad. What's not fair is raising 3 children who think love is optional, but inheritance is guaranteed. That's when Elena arrived. I'd asked her to come by around 4 p.m., knowing my children would probably still be there trying to browbeat me into changing my will. I wanted her to see exactly who she was dealing with, and I wanted my children to face the woman they'd been slandering without ever meeting her. Elena walked into a room full of hostile people and handled it with the grace of a queen. "Hello. Vincent," she said, kissing my cheek before turning to my children with a warm smile. "You must be Marcus, Antonio, and Dominic. I've heard so much about you. I'm Elena Rodriguez." The contrast was stunning. Elena, who had every reason to be defensive after months of character assassination, was gracious and welcoming. My children, who claimed to be protecting the family, were sullen and rude. Marcus didn't even stand up when Elena was introduced. Antonio mumbled something that might have been, "Hello." Dominic openly glared at her like she was a convicted criminal. "Elena," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I was just telling the boys about the changes I've made to my will." She looked confused. "What changes?" "I've made you the primary beneficiary of my estate, including the construction company." Elena's face went pale. "Vincent, we've never discussed anything like that. I don't want your money." The reaction was immediate and telling. A real gold digger would have been thrilled or would have played coy about deserving such generosity. Elena was genuinely distressed. "You don't want our father's money?" Marcus asked with obvious skepticism. "I want your father's companionship and love," Elena replied firmly. "I have my own money. Carlos left me very comfortable financially, and I've never needed Vincent's support for anything except emotional happiness." "Then you won't mind if he changes his will back to the original arrangement," Antonio said quickly. Elena turned to me with troubled eyes. "Vincent, if this is causing problems with your family, maybe we should reconsider our relationship. I never wanted to come between you and your children." This was the moment that revealed everything about everyone's true character. Elena, faced with potential wealth, wanted to refuse it to preserve my family relationships. My children faced, with Elena's obvious sincerity, doubled down on their greed and suspicion. "That's exactly what a manipulator would say," Dominic sneered. "Make yourself look innocent while driving a wedge between Dad and his real family." "Dominic, Elena just offered to walk away from millions of dollars to protect my relationship with you. What have you offered to sacrifice for our relationship?" Couldn't answer because we all knew the answer. Nothing. Dominic had sacrificed nothing for our relationship while expecting to inherit everything from it. But Elena's decency had given my children hope that they could still manipulate the situation. "Elena, we appreciate your concern for family harmony," Marcus said in his smoothest lawyer voice. "Maybe we could work out an arrangement that benefits everyone. Dad could provide for you financially while still maintaining his obligations to his children and grandchildren." An arrangement. Marcus wanted to negotiate my generosity like a business deal, treating Elena like a creditor who needed to be paid off. "What kind of arrangement?" Elena asked. "Well, maybe Dad could set aside a reasonable amount for your security, say $100,000, and leave the rest to the family as originally planned. $100,000 out of a $2.3 million estate." Marcus was offering Elena less than 5% of my wealth in exchange for her stepping aside gracefully. Elena looked at me with an expression I'll never forget, part amusement, part disgust, part pity for what my children had revealed about themselves. "Marcus," she said quietly, "your father doesn't owe me anything except honesty and kindness, which he's already given me freely. And he doesn't owe you anything except the love and guidance he provided while raising you, which you've already received." "But he's our father," Rachel protested. "Family obligations don't end just because children grow up." "You're right," Elena agreed. "Family obligations don't end. So where have you been for the past 2 years while Vincent grieved alone? Where were your family obligations when he needed emotional support instead of just financial inheritance? The why?" Silence was deafening. Elena continued with devastating precision. "Vincent has told me about your mother's illness, her death, his loneliness, his depression. He's also told me about your careers, your achievements, your families. Guess which topics he talks about with pride and which ones he talks about with pain. Any parent whose children have disappointed them understands exactly what Elena meant. We've been busy with our own lives," Antonio said defensively. "Everyone's busy," Elena replied. "The difference is that people who love you make time anyway. People who just want your money show up when inheritance is threatened." Marcus tried one last legal maneuver. "Elena, regardless of your intentions, surely you can see that it's inappropriate for someone outside the family to inherit a family business built over generations. Marcus, Vincent built that business with his own hands while you were getting your law degree that he paid for. The business isn't a family heirloom. It's the result of your father's 40 years of work. He has the right to leave it to whoever he believes will honor his legacy." "And you think that's you?" Dominic asked sarcastically. "I think it's someone who actually values what Vincent has built, instead of just seeing it as a source of money they're entitled to receive." That conversation ended with my children storming out of my house for the second time in a month, this time with their wives trailing behind them like defeated generals. Marcus paused at the door for one final threat. "Dad, you're going to regret this. We won't just accept being disinherited without a fight. Marcus, the fight started when you decided your inheritance was more important than your relationship with your father. You just lost." After they left, Elena sat beside me on the couch with tears in her eyes. "Vincent, I can't accept your will changes. This is destroying your family." "Elena, my family destroyed itself years ago through neglect and selfishness. I'm just acknowledging what was already true. But your grandchildren, my grandchildren, have parents who are doctors and lawyers. They'll be fine. But more importantly, they have a grandfather who's finally learned the difference between enabling ungrateful people and rewarding people who deserve generosity." Elena squeezed my hand. "Are you sure about this?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Elena, you gave me back my happiness when I thought it was gone forever. My children gave me nothing but guilt and disappointment. Why would I reward the people who failed me and punish the person who saved me?" That night we began planning our future together, not as a wealthy man and his gold-digging girlfriend, but as two people who'd found real love in the twilight of their lives. But my children weren't finished with their campaign to destroy our happiness. Their next move would reveal depths of vindictiveness I never imagined they possessed, and would force me to take even more drastic measures to protect the woman I loved. 3 weeks after my children stormed out of my house, I discovered just how low they were willing to sink in their campaign to destroy Elena and reclaim their inheritance. What they did next crossed every line of human decency and forced me to take measures I never thought I'd need against my own flesh and blood. It started with Elena's tears. She came to my house on a Tuesday evening, visibly shaken and clutching a manila envelope like it contained poison. "Vincent, we need to talk about something terrible that happened today." Elena had received an anonymous letter at her home, a detailed document claiming to be from concerned neighbors who had researched her background and discovered disturbing information about her relationship history. The letter contained fabricated stories about Elena manipulating elderly men, forged documents suggesting she'd been investigated for elder abuse, and doctored photographs showing her with various older men in what were presented as predatory relationships. Someone had spent considerable time and money creating professional-looking evidence, designed to make Elena appear to be exactly what my children claimed she was, a serial manipulator who targeted vulnerable widowers. But the cruelest part was the letter's conclusion. "Mrs. Rodriguez, we know you've been stealing from Mr. Castellano and manipulating him to change his will. Either end this relationship immediately, or we'll be forced to contact Adult Protective Services and the police about your elder abuse activities." Elder abuse. Someone was threatening to have Elena arrested for loving me. Anyone who's watched their children weaponize false accusations against someone who makes their parent happy knows exactly how evil this behavior is. "Elena, this is obviously fake," I said after reading the entire document. "Every claim in here is either unprovable or contradicted by facts I know to be true. But Vincent, what if people believe it? What if these accusations follow me for the rest of my life?" That's when I understood my children's strategy. They couldn't prove Elena was a gold digger, so they were manufacturing evidence to destroy her reputation and force her to leave me. But their campaign of character assassination was just getting started. Over the next week, Elena received similar letters at her workplace, her church, her grief support group, and her volunteer activities. Someone was systematically contacting every aspect of her life with the same fabricated accusations. Elena's friends started asking uncomfortable questions. Her pastor suggested she might want to step back from leadership roles until the situation was resolved. Her grief support group coordinator received so many concerned calls about Elena that they asked her to take a temporary break from attending meetings. Within 2 weeks, the character assassination campaign had isolated Elena from most of her social connections and made her afraid to leave her house. That's when I hired my own private investigator. Tommy Ricci was a former police detective who specialized in tracking down harassment campaigns and false accusation schemes. When I showed him the anonymous letters and described the pattern of attacks on Elena's reputation, he smiled grimly. "Mr. Castellano, this has amateur written all over it. Whoever's doing this thinks they're clever, but they left digital fingerprints everywhere." Tommy's investigation took exactly 5 days to trace the harassment campaign back to its source, Marcus's law firm. The anonymous letters had been printed on Marcus's office equipment, using his firm's internet connection to create fake email accounts. The concerned neighbors who'd reported Elena to various organizations were all calling from phone numbers registered to Marcus, Antonio, and Dominic. My children had conspired to frame Elena for elder abuse while impersonating concerned citizens, to destroy her reputation. But Tommy's investigation revealed something even more disturbing. Antonio had been using his medical credentials to contact Elena's doctor, claiming professional concerns about her mental health and suggesting she might be experiencing delusional episodes related to inappropriate relationships with vulnerable elderly patients. Antonio was trying to have Elena committed to psychiatric evaluation based on fabricated medical concerns. "Mr. Castellano," Tommy said as he presented his evidence, "your children have committed multiple felonies: mail fraud, identity theft, filing false police reports, harassment, conspiracy to commit fraud. We are talking about serious prison time if these charges are prosecuted. Prison time. My children had committed crimes that could land them in federal prison, all to steal money they'd never earned from a father they'd neglected for years. That night, I made the decision that would end my relationship with my children permanently. I called Frank Pellegrino and instructed him to prepare a comprehensive legal response to my children's criminal campaign. Frank, I want restraining orders against all 3 of them. I want criminal charges filed for the harassment campaign, and I want it documented that they're using fraudulent means to attempt to gain control of my estate. Vincent, are you sure you want to go this far? These are your children. Frank, these are criminals who happen to share my DNA. They've crossed the line from greed into felony behavior. They need to face the consequences. But before we filed the charges, I decided to give Marcus, Antonio, and Dominic one final opportunity to understand what they'd done to themselves. I invited them to my house under the pretense of discussing a resolution to our family conflict. They arrived with their lawyers, their wives, and prepared statements about Elena's obvious manipulation of their father. When they were seated in my living room, I placed Tommy Ricci's investigation report on the coffee table. Boys, we need to discuss your criminal activities. The color drained from their faces as I spread out the evidence of their harassment campaign, false accusations, and conspiracy to frame Elena for elder abuse. Dad, we can explain, Marcus started, but I held up my hand. Marcus, you used your law firm's resources to commit mail fraud and identity theft. Antonio, you violated your medical ethics by filing false psychiatric reports. Dominic, you impersonated government officials to file fake elder abuse complaints. The room was dead silent as they processed being caught in their criminal conspiracy. We were trying to protect you, Antonio said weakly. You were trying to destroy an innocent woman because she threatened your inheritance. There's a difference. Dad, we'll stop the harassment, Dominic said desperately. We'll leave Elena alone. Too late. The damage is done. Elena has been traumatized by your campaign of lies, and I've been forced to see my children commit felonies over money. That's when I delivered the final blow. Frank has prepared criminal charges against all three of you. Mail fraud, identity theft, harassment, conspiracy. To commit elder abuse fraud, you're looking at federal prison time. Marcus jumped to his feet. Dad, you can't be serious. We're family. Family members don't frame each other's loved ones for crimes they didn't commit. Criminals do that. We'll fight this, Antonio said, his voice shaking. We'll prove Elena manipulated you into turning against your own children. With what evidence? Fabricated documents you created in Marcus's law office. Fake psychiatric reports Antonio filed under false pretenses. Good luck with that defense. But I wasn't finished destroying their lives. There's one more thing, boys. Since you've demonstrated that you're willing to commit crimes to get my money, I've made additional changes to my will. I pulled out the new documents Frank had prepared. You're no longer receiving $10,000 each. You're receiving nothing. Zero. Your inheritance has been eliminated completely and permanently. Dad, you can't leave us nothing, Dominic whispered. I can and I have. But more than that, I've established a legal trust that specifically prohibits any of my estate from ever benefiting you, your wives, or your children, even through indirect means. The trust was bulletproof. Even if something happened to Elena, my money would go to charity rather than to children who'd committed felonies trying to steal it. Your grandchildren, Rachel protested. You're punishing innocent children for their parents' mistakes. I'm protecting innocent people from criminals who happen to be born into my family. Emma, Jake, and Sophia will learn that actions have consequences, and maybe they'll grow up to be better people than their fathers. Marcus made one final desperate attempt. Dad, we'll do anything to fix this. Therapy, family counseling, whatever it takes. Marcus, the time for fixing this was 2 years ago, when your widowed father needed emotional support. The time for fixing this was 8 months ago, when you could have welcomed Elena into our family with grace and kindness. The time for fixing this was 3 weeks ago, when you could have apologized for your behavior and started treating me with respect. It's not too late, Antonio pleaded. Yes, it is. You committed felonies trying to destroy the woman I love. That's not a mistake or a misunderstanding. That's who you really are when money is involved. The meeting ended with my children leaving my house for the final time, escorted by the sheriff's deputies, who served them with restraining orders and criminal charges. 6 months later, Marcus was disbarred for using his law firm to commit fraud. Antonio lost his medical license for filing false psychiatric reports. Dominic's graphic design business collapsed when his criminal charges became public. All three of them received federal convictions for conspiracy to commit elder abuse fraud. Marcus and Antonio received 2 years in minimum security prison. Dominic received 18 months plus community service. Their wives filed for divorce within a year, taking the children and whatever assets remained after the legal fees and restitution. Payments. My children destroyed their careers, their marriages, their relationships with their own children, and their freedom. All for money they were never going to inherit anyway. But the most satisfying part of this story isn't my children's destruction. It's what happened with Elena and me. 2 months after the criminal charges were filed, Elena and I were married in a small ceremony attended by people who actually cared about our happiness. We sold my large house and bought a beautiful condo in Florida. where we spend our days reading, traveling, volunteering at local charities, and enjoying the companionship that my children had tried so desperately to destroy. Elena has proven to be exactly what she appeared to be from the beginning. A kind, intelligent, generous woman who loves me for who I am rather than what I own. She's helped me rebuild relationships with old friends, discover new hobbies, and find joy in life again after years of loneliness and disappointment. The construction business is thriving under Elena's management. She turned out to have natural business instincts and has expanded the company into new markets my children never would have considered. Most importantly, Elena and I have built the kind of loving, supportive relationship that I thought was impossible at our age. We wake up every morning grateful for each other's presence, and we go to sleep every night knowing we're genuinely loved and appreciated. Every elderly person who's been abandoned by ungrateful children and found love again later in life understands exactly what a gift this kind of relationship represents. As for my children, they write letters from prison occasionally, claiming they've learned from their mistakes and want to rebuild our relationship when they're released. I throw those letters away without reading them. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. Some betrayals are so fundamental that forgiveness becomes impossible. Some people reveal their true character so completely that any future relationship becomes unthinkable. My children chose money over love, greed over loyalty, and criminal conspiracy over basic human decency. They made those choices as adults, with full knowledge of the consequences. They chose to see me as an obstacle to their inheritance, rather than a father who deserved basic respect and affection. They chose to frame an innocent woman for elder abuse rather than accept that she made me happy. They chose to commit felonies rather than earn money through their own efforts. Those weren't mistakes or lapses in judgment. Those were character revelations that showed me exactly who Marcus, Antonio, and Dominic really are when their true priorities are tested. Elena and I are in our mid-70s now, and we don't have time to waste on people who bring negativity and selfishness into our lives, even if they happen to be related to us. We spend our time with people who value kindness over wealth, loyalty over convenience, and love over material possessions. And we're happier than I ever imagined possible at this stage of life. If this story of choosing love over family obligation resonates with you, please share it with others who might be struggling with ungrateful children or toxic family relationships. Leave a comment about your own experiences with family members who care more about inheritance than relationships. You're not alone in dealing with this kind of heartbreak. Hit that subscribe button for more stories about standing up to entitled family members and protecting the people who truly care about you. And remember, sometimes the family you choose is more loving and loyal than the family you were born into. Thanks for listening to an old man's story about learning the difference between being loved and being used. Life's too short to waste it on people who don't appreciate what you bring to their lives.